ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Skorka. I am a sergeant with the 2nd New Jersey Regiment. We are Continental Army soldiers under the command of George Washington, with a number of other officers in between him and us. I'd like to talk a little bit today about the various articles of clothing and weaponry that we're carrying. Come on in if you're interested, a little closer. That way I don't have to quite yell. I guess the crowd's not quite as big as I might have hoped.
It won't give us any though.
Yeah, well, that's all right. We'll try to check it. So first off, do you folks have questions about anything?
Come here, Connor. Nick, come here. Get closer.
So you'll notice that even though we're all in the same regiment, we're all wearing different styles of clothing. So we'll start from the top down. You can see we have a couple of different kinds of hats. This gentleman on the end has order firearms. You guys don't have to stand at attention the whole time. That'll get tedious. These muskets get very heavy. I don't want to leave the soldiers holding it while I talk endlessly. So the hat is a military-style cocked hat. You'll notice it's not quite like the tricorn. The point of the hat is off to the side over our eye, so that when we have the musket at our shoulder, the hat doesn't interfere with it, and we can sort of turn our head a little bit as we need to for the officer's command. Of course, it's also completely useless, as opposed to this young man's hat, which will keep the sun off his face on a sunny day or the rain out of his eyes on a rainy day. Our hats don't do that. His does, though, and a lot of the soldiers would take these very nice military hats that General Washington worked very hard to get for them, and they would immediately begin to cut them apart. So if I were to cut the tape in the back of this hat like so, of course the knot now gets stuck. No pressure, I'm only talking to people here. I can then put my hat like this and it becomes less military looking but much more useful. And a lot of the soldiers did exactly that, to General Washington's great concern. After working so hard to try to get supplies for the army, the men would cut the hats apart when all he wanted was the army to look like an army instead of just a bunch of guys, a gang of ruffians with weapons. A rabble, if you will. Yes, exactly. And that's pretty much why we look the way we do. It was difficult to get supplies during the war. Congress passes regulations. This is what a soldier should look like. And it looks like a European soldier. It starts off, he's got a very nice wool coat with colored turnbacks or facings of a different color than the body of the coat. Well, before the war, all our wool clothing and fabric comes from England. They protect their wool industry. They will not let us have our own. If you go to war with England, there is no wool to make coats like that. So in the beginning of the war, a few regiments get what wool there is. They make coats of that professional European military style and issue them out. And they're made by the lowest bidder. So if you walk, say, from New Jersey up to Canada, like our regiment did in 1775, you get up to Montreal, you fight a little bit, you turn around and come home. That coat gets a lot of wear and tear on that walk up to Canada. It probably doesn't last very long beyond that 1 year's service. There being a wool shortage, General Washington figured, well, we have lots of linen here in the soon-to-be independent states. He commissioned this linen hunting frock. Sort of garment that in civilian life might have been worn by a gentleman or a frontiersman out hunting. It's not nearly as spiffy and professional looking as that wool coat, but at least if you give them out to everybody, then everybody's got the same kind of coat on, and they look a little more uniform. You give them a hat and a coat, they start to look like they belong together, like they work together, instead of just looking like a bunch of guys who showed up one afternoon. Beyond that, most of us are wearing civilian garments that maybe are or are not cut in a military style. For example, we're all wearing waistcoats. John here is wearing one of linen. I've got one made out of wool that's lined with linen. Another one made out of wool lined with linen, presumably. I can't see the inside. It's a vest, a standard civilian garment. The kind of jacket you wore over it would differ depending on your station in life and what you were doing. But pretty much everybody wore a waistcoat. Under that, we wear linen shirts. Cotton is not a very common fabric here in the Revolutionary era. At that point, cotton is mostly made in Egypt and India, which means it's very expensive to import it. The cotton industry does not take off until after American independence is granted, and then the South starts getting cotton plantations. It becomes very profitable once you invent the cotton gin and make the processing of cotton a lot easier. So we don't have a lot of cotton on us. The next garment, we're all wearing very stylish civilian knee breeches. You may notice as you look around the rest of the weekend, you'll see some other folks wearing long pants, which is more of a working man's garment. You might notice the ankle cut a little high on the civilian trousers as compared to how we wear our jeans in the modern day. You'll also notice some guys wearing what we call military overalls. If you take a look at the gentleman on the end, he's wearing gaiters over his shoes that are supposed to, there's a strap that goes under so the shoe doesn't get sucked off when you're marching in the mud. If they're tied up tightly around or buttoned up tightly around the calf and the ankle, it'll keep stones out of your shoes as well, make marching a little easier. Someone had the great idea that if we just run these down a little longer and run the gaiters up a little longer, we could just make one garment, one pair of pants out of them, easier to get dressed in the morning. So you'll see some people wearing that sort of thing as well. Our regiment, what we portray is the time of the Battle of Monmouth in 1778. So we know that our regiment left Valley Forge ahead of the rest of the army, met up with the New Jersey militia, and started making trouble for the British ahead of their march out of Philadelphia. So we try to look like we've been walking all over New Jersey for 6 or 8 weeks in the late spring and early summertime, culminating in the Battle of Monmouth at the end of June. So my linen hunting frock looks a little bit ragged, figuring that I've been sleeping out under the open air in it. I haven't had my tent with me. We just camp under the stars, or if we're lucky, in a barn somewhere if there's been some inclement weather. Our stockings, all of us are wearing wool stockings, again another common garment for both civilian and military use. Leather shoes, we all have buckles on our shoes. You will also see some guys with leather thongs to tie them, both common in both military and civilian life. Neck stock is the last piece I forgot to talk about. So the linen shirts, mine is a check pattern. Check patterns are very popular. White linen also very common. And then we wear these little bits of either cloth or leather around our necks that serve more or less the function of a necktie. In civilian life, you'll find guys with silk scarves tied up as well. In the military, the leather ones in particular, John's got a leather one that's a little bit thicker leather. The idea is to impart a military bearing. If you put a nice piece of leather, about 3 fingers width and a good thickness of leather, so it's nice and stiff, the men don't look down at the ground. They have no choice but to keep their chins up and have a proper soldierly bearing. So now we'll talk a little bit about the muskets, unless you have any questions about clothing.
2 questions.
Certainly.
First one, how did you stay warm? I mean, right now, according to the battle, it's freezing out. It's, what, 15, 20 degrees?
And this is my year-round attire. I have a thin layer of wool lined with linen, a linen shirt under that, and a linen hunting frock over it. I get cold. In the summertime, this is enough to keep me quite hot, at the Battle of Monmouth at the end of June. So hot in the summer, cold in the winter is just a soldier's life. Ideally, once you went into winter quarters, you would be able to stay indoors, stay by a fire, and what few wool coats there were would not be given to individual soldiers, but instead soldiers who were going on duty would be given the coat, and they would go out on patrol or foraging or guard duty, what have you. When they came off duty, they would turn the coat in, and the next guy coming on duty would get the coat.
Would you have to shoot your own food?
No. The foraging parties would be responsible for food, and they were under the tight control of an officer, and they would go to requisition food from civilians. Soldiers, if you fire your gun in camp, that's an alarm signal. So even if you happen to see a deer passing by or a flock of geese, firing at them is going to attract a whole lot of attention and start an alarm, because people will think you saw the enemy and the camp's under attack. You will get in a lot of trouble for that. Furthermore, there's not really a whole lot of game in this area, particularly New Jersey where we are. The Indians had been there for quite a lot of time. We're used to seeing deer all over New Jersey now, but back then, what hadn't been hunted by the Indians before the white people came was pretty much taken care of by the colonists. There was not really a tremendous population of food to go hunting for. So, but speaking of hunting, let me talk about this military firearm. In civilian life, hunting, they did have rifled weapons, and there are some rifles in military use as well. A rifle uses, they all fire round balls shaped like a marble, instead of the more bullet shape that we're used to today. So the rifle uses a patch of cloth to make the ball fit tightly into the grooves that are cut into the inside of the barrel, so that the ball will get a spin and fly straight and true. But that takes a long time to load because it's so tightly fitting. They spend a lot of time ramming it down. These are designed to load and fire rapidly. A well-trained soldier can fire between 3 and 4 rounds per minute. The inside of the barrel is smooth, which means the ball does not get that spin imparted to it, so it does not fly as straight and true. Furthermore, they use an undersized musket ball. This is 75 caliber, which means it is 75 100ths, 3/4 of an inch across on the inside. They would use a slightly smaller musket ball, maybe a 69 caliber musket ball, 69 100ths of an inch. So it fits loosely right in. They would have pre-made cartridges in their pouches, or in my case, I have a tin. Again, supply problems. Instead of getting a nice leather box like that, where he's got a wooden block in there with holes cut in it, and his rounds are all stacked in there neatly and individually, mine are just shoved loosely here into this tin. The original idea for the New Jersey Brigade is that they would have nice leather boxes for use in battle, and they would also have a tin like this to carry extra rounds. There's not enough of those to go around, so now we give out the leather boxes to some guys and the tins to other guys. You would take that pre-made round. You'd start off by half-cocking the musket. You'd have to bite the top off the round of powder. You would pour some powder into the pan to prime it and shut the pan. The rest of the powder and then the musket ball, which is at the bottom of that tube, would go in there with the paper on top. Draw out your ramrod and ram everything down. Now remember, you're doing this under fire. The enemy is shooting at you, firing cannon at you, or perhaps marching at you with his bayonets fixed. The men are drilled incessantly so that they can get to do this almost automatically and quickly, so they can do it under the stress of battle repeatedly without thinking. Having rammed it down, you can return your rammer and shoulder. And as I mentioned, the undersized musket ball fits very loosely so that you dump it in, and ramming it is as simple as that, instead of with a rifle where you might really be forcing. The powder that they used in the 18th century burns very dirty, so you will get a lot of residue left in the barrel after you fire. So after several rounds, you're having an even tougher time, whether it be a rifle or a musket like this, getting that musket ball down. You want to make sure it's firmly seated at the bottom of the barrel, because the powder's in little grains. That'll slide right down. If the musket ball is stuck here in the middle of the barrel, when you fire, the powder that's here that's burning, the force of that explosion meets the obstruction up here. It may dislodge the ball and drive it out, or it may blow up your musket barrel. And if I'm standing here next to him in a battle and his musket blows up, that's bad for both of us. So you want to avoid that happening. The men would load and fire in unison under the control of an officer, simply because it's not an accurate weapon. It could hit a man-sized target at maybe 80 yards, according to tests they performed in the 18th century. So you get a bunch of guys together, load them quickly, and they can hold a piece of ground, because by the time you come within range of that weapon, the lethality of it is a great deal further than 80 yards. As long as we can keep up a steady rate of fire, you can't get close enough to drive us off the patch of ground we're holding. Tactics in the 18th century are about controlling pieces of ground, much like a game of chess. However, if your musket fire or your cannon fire has managed to soften up the enemy a bit, you then might have your troops fix bayonets. Fix your bayonets. Shoulder, firelocks. So, having softened up the enemy with musket fire and cannon fire, you could then charge him. Charge! Bayonets! Huzzah! Now, it's probably not so frightening with only 3 of us, but if you imagine a couple hundred guys in a company or a couple companies all doing this, and then we just start marching at you slowly, front march, methodically, probably yelling huzzah, taking our time, halt,